Greetings, everyone. Excited to share some words with you today about this moment that we're in and how essential it is for us to be thoughtful and critical and forward thinking in how we deal with it all. And most people will think that I'm talking about this global health crisis, this pandemic. But what's more important to me is not just this pandemic. And I recognize that so many lives have been lost and so many livelihoods have been shifted and changed. And young folks who have now had to transition from being offline and going to online learning with teachers with no training are all being impacted in severe ways. But what's most important to me in this season is not the pandemic, but the pandemic that this pandemic sits within. And that larger pandemic is a pandemic of institutional sanctioned violence and racism, of state sanctioned violence and racism, and the fact that it has gone unaddressed for far too long. Those of us who are in higher education may conduct research in some avenue that may affect this or touch upon this, but to critically look at the ways that we are a part of a machine that ensures that Black bodies are being discriminated against, or violence is being impacted on them, or that lives are lost, it's important for us to recognize. And when I say violence, I'm not just talking about physical violence, I'm not just talking about murder, and those things are egregious, but I'm talking about emotional violence, spiritual violence, the loss of a platform, the loss of voice, the feeling as though your label goes unfocused upon, this feeling of unrequited love that is the experience of Black students and Black scholars in academia, where we give so much to institutions, we show up present wanting to get something back and never get a full recognition or never get a full awareness of the complexities of our experiences, this metaphorical knee consistently being placed on our necks. And while we may all demonize that police officer or those police officers for having a knee on the neck of George Floyd, we also have to look at the metaphorical knees on the necks of Black folks in this country, within schools, within institutions, who can't breathe because they can't feel love and joy and happiness and can't feel fully present in spaces, even though those spaces advocate or profess to be anti-racist. I want us to think about how this is impacting teaching and learning. Not the pandemic of that causes us to go online, but the pandemic of state-sanctioned violence and institution-sanctioned violence that manifests itself as teachers who don't focus on the culture of young people, where they cannot fully emote and fully be present in the classroom. And what do we, as scholars, as thinkers, as researchers, as teachers, as educators, as counselors, as psychologists, as healthcare workers, have to do to ensure that we are ready for the fact that everyone is in this midst of unknowing, of questioning what the next steps are. And I make the argument that our next steps are to be nimble and to be hybridized. Like that the next frontier in addressing this larger pandemic that this pandemic sits within, to address the pandemic of inequities in education that sits within state-sanctioned and institution-sanctioned violence and racism, is for us to understand that our work is to be nimble enough to listen to young folks, nimble enough to listen to communities, take down those hierarchies that say that only scholars and thinkers can inform what happens. When can we all collectively pay attention to young people? Pay attention to folks who have been pushed out of school, who never had a voice on a platform. And then when we are nimble enough to listen to them, how do we become hybridized and ensuring that we utilize all platforms to give voice to inequities? We should be marching, yes, but we should also be marching through our pedagogy. We should be marching in the streets, yes, but we should also be marching in our approaches to teaching and learning. How are we utilizing all the technological platforms that are at our disposal to speak truth to power? When you have classrooms of young folks, why are we still just waiting on Zoom or Google Meets? How are we using Instagram, and how are we using TikTok, and how are we using Facebook, and how are we using Instagram live groups? How are we using Twitter? How are we using all the avenues that we have at our disposal to be able to reimagine the ways that we reach new audiences and thinking about teaching and learning in an interesting and provocative and way that centers the Black experience? And a lot of folks are talking now about the experiences of folks of color. And I want to make us be very clear that folks of color have been harmed by institutions. Folks of color do suffer under the pandemic that is state-sanctioned violence and institution-sanctioned violence and racism. But Black folks in particular have needs in this moment. There's something about our phenotype that causes folks to be able to pull forth the most horrific aspects of themselves, and not only how they kill us in the street, but how they teach us in the classrooms. And so for all of us in this moment, think about yourself. Think about how you are complicit in the violence. And also think about the fact that you have to force yourself to be nimble. Force yourself to be hybridized. Force yourself out of your comfort zone as we reimagine what teaching and learning looks like. Let us address the global health crisis, but let us first address the larger pandemic that it all sits within. Thank you.